everyone, and welcome to Cybersecurity, where we'll be talking about how cybercrime has changed in 2023. And quick introductions. So for those of you who haven't met me before, I'm John Malloy, and I'm the Head of Growth at Practice Protect, and I'll be taking us through today's session on cybercrime and the changes in cybersecurity around the world. Now, for those of you who haven't heard about me or Practice Protect, what we do and how we help is that we're the #1 cybersecurity platform for accountants. So we're currently working with over 21,000 accountants globally, helping them to reduce their risk and also ensure compliance. Okay, so we help firms across across a few different areas, helping them to manage access, to manage device security and email security. And a little bit about me. So I've always worked in IT. So before working in Practice Protect, I used to work at a healthcare software company back in the UK. I'm now based in Australia, so I'm working in Practice Protect's Brisbane office. And I've been with Practice Protect for just under 6 years now. And so over that time, I've worked with hundreds, maybe at this point, thousands of firms to help them improve and increase on their cybersecurity. Awesome. And yeah, really looking forward to today's session because there's nothing I love more than talking about security. So I hope you all enjoy it too. Great. But really what we'll be running through today is these main points on the screen here. Okay, so we're going to start off by taking a look at what the state of cybercrime is today. So what are the biggest threats globally? Secondly, really important, we'll take a look at how this actually happens, okay? Because there's lots of confusion out there around cybercrime and, people aren't sure of what the most relevant threats are for their business. So I'm going to give you guys some practical examples of real life scams that we've seen targeting accounting firms. After that, we'll take a look at compliance updates. Now, this is really key, and it's an area which is often overlooked by firms, okay? Because we find that a lot of firms focus on the technical side, but they don't think about the legislative or the compliance aspects around cybercrime and cybersecurity. So I'll be providing some high-level guidance on that too. And then really the fourth point, which is where we'll spend the bulk of the session, is by talking about what you can do today. Okay, so I'm not just going to give you issues, I'll give you practical steps that you can implement in your business to dramatically reduce your risk and exposure. Okay, but without further ado, let's jump into it. So looking at cybercrime today, what are the trends? What's happening out there? And recently, or just earlier this month, Microsoft put out their digital defense report, which highlights what some of the biggest scams are out there. And I thought that this was a great place to start when we're looking at this because Microsoft are in a very unique place globally where they have access to so many different businesses and across so many different geographies. Okay, so for today's session, I know this is a global session. So we've got firms jumping on from Australia, the US, the UK, all over. So I thought it would be a good place to start and looking at Microsoft's global report to outline the trends they're seeing around the world. But what we're seeing, if we start off here, is that cybercrime is continuing to rise. Okay, like I said at the start, I've been with Practice Protect for 6 years now, and every year I've been with Practice Protect has been a record year for cybercrime. Okay, it keeps on increasing. Okay, and one of the reasons which Microsoft have highlighted here around that is because the cybercrime economy lowers the skill barrier to entry. So what that means in short is that people who aren't technical can actually set up hacking businesses, start hacking. Okay, there's a whole economy out there called cybercrime as a service. Okay, so just as, as an accountant, as well as anyone, you can go online and you can download, you can pay a subscription, get access to software. Hackers can do the same thing for viruses, okay, and for hacking tools. So what that means is that the skill barrier to entry this is far lower, okay? Essentially, anyone could jump on and become a hacker. And that's leading to a huge increase as, more and more people can start utilizing these technologies. The next point that Microsoft have highlighted is just the scope and the scale of this and how this has changed, because it has risen exponentially. Okay, so Microsoft have reported that on their systems alone, so on Microsoft 365, the volume of password attacks has risen exponentially. So they're now seeing 921 attacks on 365 every single second. That's every second of every day, 921 attacks, which is a huge increase. It's a 74% increase in just 1 year. And I wanted to start with that because we'll talk a bit more about password attacks later, okay? Because really password security and managing that is one of the biggest risks with firms working online, okay? As we're shifting into working in more of a cloud-based environment, the cloud is generally far, far more secure than working with your data stored locally, okay? It's about making sure that your access to it with passwords is secure. And I'll talk more about that. The next section, the next stat which Microsoft highlight is around the threat of ransomware and extortion, okay? And that's becoming more of a pervasive threat around the world, okay? And the damage it's causing is far greater as well. Okay, so hackers are now targeting, different businesses and more sophisticated businesses as the scams which they're deploying are more and more advanced. And the last one is the one which is really relevant to accountants because we see this targeting firms so many times, okay? It's phishing scams. Okay, and we're seeing these are on the rise. Okay, so scammers are targeting businesses, getting them to hand over their passwords, getting them to hand over their access, and then they're getting into people's inboxes and deploying really sophisticated scams and invoice fraud to get them to hand over information. And that's really where I want to start with this, because when we're talking about how it happens and what the threats are, really the number one risk is around email. Okay, so I just want to take a second to pause and talk about that because, like I said, at Practice Protect, we're working with over 21,000 accountants. And what we're seeing is that the number one most targeted application is email. As we saw on the previous slide, Microsoft are reporting over 920 attacks per second on it. Okay, and so why is that? Why is email the number one target? And it used to be back in the day that criminals would target banks, they'd rob trains to get their payout, as that's where the money was. Now everything's shifted online. Okay, so the biggest payout is through cybercrime, and the easiest payout as well is for hackers to target email. And I want to talk about that why to start off with, because email is really targeted for three main reasons. Okay, firstly, everybody has one. Okay, so I say every business, 99.9% of businesses would have an email address. Okay, so hackers don't know what different systems or applications businesses are using, but everyone has email. So that makes it a juicy target for them to aim for because they know that so many businesses are using it. And then secondly, with email, there's only a couple of major providers here. Okay, so the vast majority of businesses would be using Office 365 or Google Workspace. Okay, so from a numbers game alone, if you're going to be targeting an application, it makes sense to go after the applications that most businesses are using. Okay, so that's one of the first reasons around why email is targeting. And the second reason why is because of the amount of damage they can do inside of it. If you think about your email, it's almost like your master identity. Okay, so if a hacker was to get access to your inbox, it wouldn't just be your email that they'd have access to. Okay, if you're using Workspace, Google or Microsoft, they could also be documents in SharePoint, in Google Drive, but also emails are your master identity and it's linked to other accounts. Okay, so they can see what other applications you're accessing. And then from there, we have seen auxiliary breaches after they've got into emails. And lastly, why they're targeting emails and why it can be so damaging is, staying with that identity theme, it's pretty much online identity theft. Okay, so if a hacker, gets access to your inbox, they've got access to so much personal information. Okay, so once a hacker gets into an inbox, they know who you're communicating with, they know who all of your contacts are, they know how you're communicating with people, how you talk, you're writing your email style, what words you spell wrong, how you structure subjects. So after they sat in inboxes for a while, they can build up a profile, okay, and then they can start mimicking people. So it is essentially online identity theft. And that's what we're seeing here is that emails and the kind of scams we're sending out are so targeted. And I'll share an example of one in a second. Okay, but I am jumping ahead slightly because first off, I want to talk about how do hackers actually get in? Okay, because emails are at risk, and as we looked at with Microsoft, what they're trying to do is trick people. They're trying to get passwords handed over to them so that then they can walk in through the front door. Okay, hackers aren't breaking into Microsoft's data centers. They're stealing passwords and getting in that way. So how is this happening? How are they getting in? And there's a few different ways, there's multiple ways this could happen, but I've listed some of the more common ones on the screen here. So the most common one, and this is one which Microsoft highlighted, is phishing emails. Okay, so, and you can see an example of one on the screen here. And this is fairly typical for what we see of a standard phishing scam to get someone's credentials. So what's happened here is that a team member has received an email saying that your mailbox will shut down, verify your account. And it says, if you don't click here to verify, then you'll be locked out of your account. Then what would happen is once you click this link, it would take you to a fake version of a Microsoft login screen. The person would put in their details, and at that point, the hacker would have their username and password and would be able to get access to that account. Okay, now this is really interesting. This is one of the most common scams that we're seeing, and one of the ways in which hackers are breaking in. And the reason why they're getting in like that is it's just purely a numbers game. Okay, scammers and hackers, they get mailing lists online. Like you can go online and get 100,000, 1 million email addresses, and they'll use systems much like accountants use marketing systems to send out marketing emails. Hackers would do the same things, but with essentially hacking automation software. Okay, so they'll send out millions of these emails, and all they need is just 0.01% of people to click on it, and then that's how they get their return. Okay, so I know when we're looking at emails like this, when we're on a cybersecurity webinar, you'd be like, oh, my team would never fall for that. That's so unconvincing. But the fact is, if they're sending it out to millions of people, there's going to be 0.1%. There's going to be a small percentage that will click and hand over their data, and that's how they get in. Okay, I also want to highlight a couple of the other ways in which we're seeing hackers get access to inboxes, because it's not just happening through phishing. There's also social engineering. So phishing is a form of social engineering, but also we're seeing there are some other scams. So where hackers would be phoning up as well. So we've seen there have been instances where they're phoning up pretending to be from internet service providers, from IT providers as well, to get team members to hand over information. The third one is increasingly common, whereby we're seeing that passwords are being exposed in data breaches. So what would happen is that the team member has signed up for a different website, signed up for a website, and then that has had a breach. And then what's happened then is that information is now sat on the dark web. So that hacker would then just take that password and try to log on to different applications with this. And the last way in which they get in, which is common as well, is with brute force hacking. So what that is that's when hackers would get hold of your email address, so just your email, so john.malloy@practiceprotect.com, and then they try a random combination of passwords until they eventually break through. Okay, but all of these scams, and really how these email scams start, is through the password. Okay, it's around access. But then what happens when they actually get in there? Okay, because once they get in, really what we're seeing now and how this is changing is that the most lucrative target is when they complete business email compromise scams, or BEC for short. Now, there are a couple of different ways in which hackers, there are a couple of different methods around business email compromise, but I just want to share a couple of the more common ones. So I've got on the screen here a screenshot, and this is an example of a scam that we saw targeting an accounting firm that we now support. And I'll just walk you through what happened in this scenario. So in this scenario, Sarah, or as I said, we've changed the details here. So Sarah, who is the accountant, received an email from her client, which is the accounts at email, asking for payment. Now, what's happened in this scam is that the client's email address has been hacked. Okay, so the hacker has gotten into the client's account. They've seen that Sarah, the accountant, usually approves and processes payments for this person. So then they've targeted the accountant with a hyper-specific message like this, asking them to pay an invoice. Okay, and this is very typical. Okay, I've heard about this happening, targeting so many different accounting firms. Okay, a client's account has been breached, and then they're going after where the money is. So that's why they're targeting these firms. And it's interesting to see how this is changing, okay? Because it used to be a couple of years ago, hackers would get access to somebody's inbox and then they just send out a blanket email with ransomware to all of their contacts. Now it's a lot more targeted, okay? They're going through and they're seeing who they can target to get the most information. And they're very costly as well. So you can see the average cost of one of these scams is $64,000. Okay, and that's why hackers are investing so much time into this. Okay, so what happens is when an inbox gets breached, the hacker doesn't do anything straight away anymore. They don't just send out that one email blast and hope that someone gets ransomware. They sit in that inbox and they'll sit there for a number of weeks, mining out information, seeing who they communicate with, seeing what payments are go out, how frequently, who approves those payments. And then only after they've worked out the most cost-effective scam, that's when they'd send an email like this. Okay, and then when they go out, they're highly convincing and they are difficult to spot. So this is an example of one with a client's account being hacked. But I also want to highlight another example that we've seen, which is where a accounting firm, someone internal, actually had their account compromised. Okay, so you can see another example on the screen here. Again, we've changed everything in this. So this, the account number, the names, the name of the firm are all changed. But apart from that, this is an example which was shared with us. So just before we go through this email, I'll give you a little bit of background on this. So there's two people here. So you've got Sam and Kat, obviously not their real names. We have anonymized this. And Sam is the owner and Kat is one of the team members. Now, what's happened here is that Sam's email had been hacked. Okay, so he'd reused passwords across multiple different websites, and one of them had been exposed in a data breach. So the hackers have then got that data online, and they'd actually then were able to access his Microsoft account because it hadn't been configured correctly for security. So they bypassed multi-factor. Okay, and then what happened is before this email was sent, the hackers had been in this account for 4 weeks prior to sending this email. So they knew every little detail about this firm and their target. Okay, so I'll go through the email in a sec. I'll give everyone a chance to take a quick look at it. And I'll take a sip from my QuickBooks Connect bottle. I'm a full QuickBooks brand here. Okay, but what we're seeing here is that this scam is a very sophisticated one, but there's a few different details that I'd like to highlight here. So firstly, I'd just like to highlight how targeted this is. Okay, so as I commented on earlier, so the hackers had been in this account for 4 weeks, so they knew who was who. So Kat, the person that's emailed here asking to make this payment, is the person that usually makes payments. So it's not an out of the ordinary request. Okay, the second point to note is the timing. Okay, so because the timing of this was very sophisticated as well. The scammer had access to Sam's account. So, when they sent this, they knew the time that it was being sent. So it said here, I know you're working from home. They could see that from the calendar. They knew that Kat was work from home. Okay, and they also sent this at a time when Sam was actually in a meeting with a client. Okay, so with Kat being work from home, that meant that she couldn't easily double check this with another team member. And with Sam being in that meeting, it also meant that it looked more genuine and more credible. Okay, another point to notice is the tone. So they'd had access to all of Sam's previous emails, so they knew how he usually wrote. So all of the language in here is consistent with how he'd usually speak. Okay, even the typo at the end saying counting you, that was deliberate, okay, as Sam would frequently have typos in his emails. Okay, and the last point to emphasize, and this is classic for the scams that we see, is the urgency. Okay, they're trying to rush someone into doing this, into making a payment without double checking. Okay, so you can see it says urgent in the title. Okay, it says, I'm counting on you, please pay immediately. So they're really trying to rush the team member into paying this. Okay, so this is this is a very sophisticated example that we've seen, which is why I flagged it here. Now, in this instance, what should have happened is that Kat should have double checked this with another team member, as it was a payment to a new account that should have been checked. But because of all of these points, it was missed, and a payment then did go missing. Okay, and all of this happened because a hacker got access to Sam's account at the start into his email. Okay, and as I said, for the last part of the session, we're going to focus in on what you can do to prevent that from happening. So the next point I want to talk about and just take you through quickly is the compliance space, because there are different compliance updates for this. So when it comes to compliance, I will be keeping this high level because really, there's different, like I said, different locations on here, and each of these is a session in its own, talking about compliance across different locations. I'd say really the most important point with compliance and with legislation is to know your obligations. Okay, so there are different obligations in these locations. So for those in the EU, there's the GDPR, the General Data Protection, sorry, I need to slow down, the General Data Protection Regulation, which was released in 2018, which companies in the EU need to comply with. The UK have their own version, which was updated and released last year. Also in Australia, there's legislation to be aware of as well. So there's the notifiable data breach reporting legislation, which was actually updated last year as well. They updated the penalties assigned to that. And lastly, in the US, there are specific guidelines for taxpayers to comply with around safeguarding taxpayer data. And then on top of that, there's different federal and state-based legislation. So as I said, each of these is really a session on its own. The point that I want to emphasize here is that there is legislation specific to every geography, every location. So it's really important that you double check what your obligations are and make sure that you are compliant with them. Okay, but on top of that, one thing that we are seeing globally is that cyber insurance is changing. Okay, and we work with firms across all of those locations, and we've seen that with firms of the policies that we're working with. Okay, and what we're seeing is that cyber insurance companies are really updating their policies and updating their exclusions based on the increased threat out there. Okay, and when you think about this, this isn't a unique phenomenon with insurance. Okay, so as I said at the start, I live and work here in Australia, and we've seen something similar in Australia with other more general insurance. So it's becoming increasingly hard and more expensive to get insurance cover for fire and for flooding, as we've had a lot of instances of fire and floods in the last couple of years. So it's becoming more difficult and more costly to get that insurance. And the same thing is happening with cyber insurance, but it's actually happening at more of a rapid pace. Okay, so it used to be, if you went back a number of years ago, cyber insurance used to be included as standard with most companies' insurance, but then it was taken out and it was made into its own plan. So then people needed their own cyber insurance policy. Now that's changing again. Okay, and what we're seeing is that they're now updating what's actually included in that insurance. Okay, so obviously, every cyber insurance company is different and will have different inclusions and exclusions. But what we've seen from a number that we've worked with is that social engineering isn't always being included as standard. And also protection against certain scams. So for instance, BEC and email fraud, what we looked at earlier, is an add-on in some policies. Now, again, with insurance, I'd say it's the same message as I highlighted earlier. With compliance, it's about knowing your obligations. Okay, every insurance policy will be slightly different, but this is the general trend that we're seeing. Okay, as the threat is increasing, as the cost, the impact of it is increasing, insurance companies are updating as well. So it's definitely something which you need to be across, knowing what's included and what isn't included. Awesome, but just moving on, really want to focus now on what you can do. Okay, what are the steps which you can take to secure your business and to reduce your risk profile? Okay, and the good news with this is it shouldn't have to be complicated. Okay, there are some very simple quick wins and quick changes you can make which are free or low cost to dramatically reduce your risk profile. Okay, so when we're taking a look at cybersecurity and what you need to do to secure your business, The way in which we look at this is that you need to update multiple different layers. Okay, so you can see on the screen here, for what we recommend doing is addressing the 3 pillars of cybersecurity. Okay, because securing a business is much like securing a house. Okay, so before you leave your home in the morning, you lock the back door, lock the front door, shut the windows, switch on the alarm. Okay, there's multiple steps to do to secure that facility. It's the same with a business. Okay, there's multiple ways data can get in and out. So there's multiple steps you can take. We just boil it down for simplicity to these 3 main points. So firstly, tech. Okay, making sure that you've implemented tools with the team to make it easy and secure. Okay, and it's really important to make it easy for your team as well. Okay, you don't want security to be a blocker. You don't want to frustrate your team. You want to be putting in steps to make it easy for them to do the right thing. Next up, it's about your team. Okay, so training your team so that they aren't cybersecurity risks. Okay, they're actually cybersecurity defenses for your business. Okay, if we look at those scams earlier, all of them took some kind of human interaction. Okay, phishing scams, business email compromise. Okay, that comes from team members being fooled into doing something that they shouldn't do. So if you start by training your team, you dramatically reduce your risk profile. And then lastly, compliance, making sure that you're complying with the latest data security guidelines. Okay, so let's take a look at these 3 pillars in a little bit more detail. So to start off with, it's about securing technology in your business. So securing the multiple layers of technology across your business. Now, there's been a large shift in how firms are working recently, because it used to be that firms had data stored locally. Most applications were stored locally on a server. There has been a large shift to be working online. Okay, now working online does reduce a lot. Working online and in the cloud does reduce a lot of risks for businesses, as they don't have to worry about the data storage of it. But one thing to be aware of when you're working online is around access. Okay, so one of the first layers you need to look at is around access and passwords. Okay, so ensuring that you have a simple and simple way for your team members to work securely online, and that you have control over that as well, so that team members' passwords are controlled and managed securely. Okay, next up with the tech, it's about making sure that your email system is secure too. Okay, so working online on Microsoft 365 and Google, those are the most targeted applications. So ensuring that you've reviewed the security around that, ensuring that you've reviewed how you access those applications, the mail delivery, spam filtering as well, locking those down. There are settings that you can set up within these applications, so there's no additional costs involved, that you can use those to secure those apps. And then the last technical piece is what's on the screen here, is your devices. Okay, so making sure that the devices which you're working on are secure. Okay, because if you're working from infected devices, then potentially everything that you touch could then be compromised. Next up, it's the team. Okay, so 82% of data breaches are actually due to human error. Okay, so by training up your team, you dramatically reduce your risk profile. Okay, there's lots of different ways in which this can be done. Okay, so if you go online, if you Google cybersecurity training, there's a multitude of resources out there. And again, I know this is a global session, but if you check the respective governments, so in Australia, the Australian Cybersecurity Centre, in the USA, you've got the Cyber Information and Security Agency. They've got some really good resources available there. And same in the UK, you've got cyber.gov, I believe it is, who have some amazing free resources. But also another thing you can do and implement with your team is to do ongoing cybersecurity training. So one of the things that we do is whenever you receive a phishing scam, just take a screenshot of it, forward it and share it with the team. Okay, and then that way you can provide some training to say, hi, I knew this was a scam because of X, Y, and Z reason. Obviously, don't send the actual dodgy email with the link, just send a screenshot of it. Awesome. And then lastly, it's compliance. Okay, so again, with this, I can't jump into the detail too much, but really the most important point here is to know your obligations. Okay, so check what the data security legislation is like in your area, and also double check your cyber insurance policy. Okay, and when you're checking your cyber insurance policy, make sure that you meet the minimum requirements in it. Okay, because we have seen there are instances where businesses have had cyber attacks, but they haven't put the correct security in place to secure to actually comply with them. Okay, so make sure that you are checking those terms and conditions in there. Awesome, great. Well, look, that really brings us up to the end of today's session. For those of you, if you want to learn anything more about what we do, any questions at all from myself, I've just popped my details on the screen there. So feel free to reach out to me on john.malloy@practiceprotect.com, or I'm sure you can find me on LinkedIn. Just search for me there. Or if you want to learn a little bit more about how we help firms and where we fit into this, you can check out our website there. Okay, but that really takes us up to the end of it. So just want to say thanks to you all for your time today. And yeah, we'll be in touch. Yeah, thanks everyone. Cheers.